Hello, my name is Cindy Toth, and I am on the Halton Environmental Network Board of Directors, and I welcome you to the call. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. HCC Reads aims to engage the residents of Halton in reading, listening to, and asking about climate change while learning how we, as a community, can act to protect our planet. It is a program of the Halton Climate Collective and is driven by the Halton Environmental Network. This is our third HCC Reads program, and we are so pleased with the increasing interest and engagement. We hope you will enjoy the rest of the evening.
Hi, my name is Gandhi.
My name is Casey, and we are both grade 12 students and student trustees for the Halton District School Board. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history.
As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
My name is Azir Kaur, and I am also on the board of Halton Environment Network, also known as HEN. HEN, both as an organization and as the backbone of HCC, works collaboratively with governments, organizations, and residents to build policies for climate change mitigation, adaptation, and environmental sustainability in our community. Programs like Generation Green, Halton Green Screens, Halton Foods, Greening Sacred Spaces, and Oakville Ready bring education and awareness of climate change, as well as opportunities to act for all residents of Halton. HEN seeks to build a sustainable, climate-resilient Halton community.
Thanks, Uzair. As members of the Halton Climate Collective, or HCC, environmental leaders from Sheridan College, Conservation Halton, Halton Region, all the municipalities of Halton, both school boards, including the Halton District School Board, the Halton Catholic District School Board, University of Waterloo, and the Halton Environmental Network work together to respond to the challenges of climate change and drive successful greenhouse gas mitigation and adaptation in the Halton community. The leaders of the Halton Climate Collective work together to build low-carbon, climate-resilient community. Stay tuned to HCC's website, climatecollective.ca/HCC Reads, as we continue to update it with more information and links to the activities of our HCC partners. We are honored tonight to be hearing from Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, author of the book, Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. Welcome, Katharine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So I am from Etobicoke, and in addition to writing for outlets in the States, I've written for Chatelaine magazine, one of my favorite places, and I have a new op-ed coming out in the Globe and Mail, I think tomorrow or the day after. So you might see me in a few different places. I am a climate scientist, and the reason I'm a climate scientist is because of a class I took at U of T. So I was planning to be an astrophysicist. My dad was actually the science coordinator for the Toronto District School Board, so the apple did not fall far from that tree. And I was almost finished my undergrad at U of T in physics and astronomy when I needed an extra class to complete my breadth requirements. I looked around and there was this brand new class over in Sid Smith, if you're familiar with U of T, on climate change. And I thought, well, that looks interesting. Why not take it? So I did, and I was completely shocked to learn that climate change is much more urgent than we thought, and that was back then. It's even more urgent now. And that climate change is not only an environmental issue. It is, but it is also a health issue. It's a poverty issue. It's a refugee crisis issue. It's a national security issue. Climate change is an everything issue. And if we don't fix it, it will fix us. That's what made me decide to become a climate scientist, to do everything I could to tell people why this matters and what we can do to fix it. So that's what my book is about, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, I'm going to be talking to you, but you are also going to be talking to me. And here's how this works. If you could bring the screen up here. If you go to polev.com/Katharine, you have to spell it with 2 A's, the way I spell my name. You can click on the link I think that they put in the chat, or you can type it into your phone or your computer. Go to pollev.com/Katharine, POLLEV.com/KATHARINE, and you will be able to tell me things as well as me telling you things. So people have already got on this. You're pretty quick. Where do you live? This is the first question. This is the easy question to make sure that you can use this. Where do you live? It looks like we have, not everybody's in Halton. That's what I suspected. I suspected not everybody was in Halton. So we've got Hamilton, GTA showing up. We've got people listening in from nowhere near, which is awesome. Oh, a few people showed up from Peel. It took you a little bit longer to get there. All right, GTA is coming in a little bit more. Okay, all right. So this sort of feels like election night, doesn't it? It looks like we are at about, Halton's holding strong at 70%. And then 30% other, Peel, Hamilton, GTA, and nowhere near. All right, so that was the first question. Now we're going to get a little bit more difficult. The next question I'm going to ask you requires you to give me a word, but just one word. The question I want to ask you now is this. When it comes to climate change, I feel what? Give me a word on how you feel when someone says climate change to you. And we have a little bit of a delay here, so we might see Hamilton and Halton popping up there. How do you feel when I say climate change? And don't worry, this is anonymous. I have no idea who you are. There's no way to tag what you say to what you put in here. So put whatever you want. I only have a language filter. I will add that. All right. Well, to those of you who are saying worried, scared, alarmed, concerned, you are not alone. 3/4 of all of us in Canada feel that way. 3/4 of us. Even down in the States where I live now, 70% of people say worried, scared, concerned, overwhelmed. 83% of mothers are worried. 84% of young people are worried. If you feel worried, you represent the majority of people. When it comes to climate change, we feel worried. We also feel exhausted. We feel challenged. We feel responsible, frustrated, stressed, mad, yes. I probably have cycled through just about every emotion that I see on the screen. As a climate scientist, I think about this every single day. The reason I wrote my book is because of this. The number one question that I get, no matter who I'm speaking to, no matter where I am, I could be talking to a university or a school, a community group, business people, somebody in the faith community. The number one question I get, no matter where I am, is this: what gives you hope? That's why I wrote my book. Let's start at the beginning. The book is called Saving Us. Why is it called Saving Us? Shouldn't it be called Saving the Planet? No, the book is not called Saving the Planet because, despite what you might have heard, it is not about saving the planet. The planet will be orbiting the sun long after we are gone. What is this about? It's about saving us. Us humans and many of the other living things that share this planet with us, we are the ones who are at risk. So it's not choosing between the planet or the economy or the planet or people. No, the planet will survive without us. The question is, we can't survive without the planet. That's why this matters. The planet gives us the water that we drink. And climate change affects that. It affects the air that we breathe. We all felt and saw the wildfire smoke in the skies this summer. It affects the food that we eat. We cannot live without it. It affects the buildings and roads and water and electricity systems that we use. One of the biggest ways that climate change is affecting us today is by loading the weather dice against us. What do I mean by that? Well, wherever we live, we always have a chance of a drought, a heat wave, a wildfire, a storm. That's just a natural part of life on this planet. So where does climate change come in? As the world gets warmer, decade by decade by decade, it's loading the weather dice against us. It's sneaking in and taking one of the numbers and turning it into another 6, taking another number and turning it into a 7. All of a sudden, we're rolling our weather dice and we're getting more and more extreme weather. We are getting deadlier heat waves. We're getting stronger hurricanes. We're getting longer droughts, and we're getting wildfire burning more area. And we say, how could this be happening? The answer is climate change. What do we see happening around the world? We see climate change exacerbating drought in Madagascar today. The United Nations World Food Program estimates that food insecurity is estimated to push another 14,000 people into catastrophic acute insecurity. And this number will double by the end of the year. What is happening here? Well, out west, we had a terrible heat wave this past summer. And we've crunched the numbers as climate scientists, and we found that climate change made that heat wave out west at least 150 times more likely than it would have been otherwise. Could it have occurred naturally? It could have, but it was 150 times more likely to occur because of climate change. Climate change is, as the US military calls it, a threat multiplier. In other words, it often doesn't create new problems. It takes problems that already exist and it makes them worse. Like what type of problems? Like some of the worst that we have. This article was written when people were being airlifted out of Afghanistan. And the situation in Afghanistan is the result of many issues. It was not caused by climate change. So where does climate change come in? It's a threat multiplier, making it worse. Let me just read a little bit of this to highlight it for you. Parts of Afghanistan have warmed twice as much as the global average. And in fact, Canada has also warmed twice as fast as the global average. Their spring rains have declined in some of the most important farmland. Droughts are more frequent, and they've seen punishing dry spells, the second in 3 years. See that? More likely. It would be facile, it says, to attribute the conflict to climate change. No, it didn't cause the conflict. But what climate change does is it acts as a threat multiplier, amplifying conflict over water, putting people out of work in a nation where people largely live off the land. As a professor of hydrology says here, the war has exacerbated climate change impacts. For 10 years, over 50% of the national budget goes to the war. Now there is no government and the future is unclear. Our current situation today is completely hopeless. What's happening today, right here in our country, not in Southern Ontario, but over in BC? They're being hit by an atmospheric river. What is an atmospheric river? It's a phenomenon that's been around for a long time. Atmospheric rivers are responsible for about 30 to 40% of the precipitation they get on the West Coast. This is what an atmospheric river looks like in a satellite image. Can you see that long sort of river of water vapor in the sky stretching right across the Pacific from China all the way over to the West Coast of North America? That's an atmospheric river. Why do they bring rain to British Columbia? It's because when that air hits the mountains, it starts to rise. And as it rises, all the water vapor that's carrying, it's literally like a river in the sky. That's how much water vapor is in there. All that water vapor condenses and falls. So we typically get heavy rain events when atmospheric rivers hit. Where does climate change come in? Climate change is making atmospheric rivers stronger and more intense. Climate change is also increasing the amount of water vapor available for that atmospheric river to sweep up and dump on us. Why? Because warmer air holds more water vapor. So the warmer the air gets, the more water vapor there is for the atmosphere to sweep into that atmospheric river and funnel straight for BC. This is what it looks like in a satellite image. You can see it even more clearly. This is an atmospheric river, not the one right now. This one is hitting San Francisco, but you can see what it looks like. It is literally a river in the sky. And so British Columbia, which already endured a record-breaking heat wave and devastating wildfires, which destroyed many of the trees that would otherwise protect from flooding and landslides, is now experiencing record-breaking floods. Climate change is loading the dice against us wherever we live. Wildfires, heat waves, floods, hurricanes, each part of Canada is being affected differently, but each part is being affected. This is a visual image of what I'm talking about. So if you live in Ontario, we have heat waves on our weather dice, we have heavy rainfall events and floods, we have winter storms. And we naturally get all of these events. But as climate is changing, again, it's like it's sneaking in, taking one of those numbers and then another and changing them into 6s and changing another one into 7. And all of a sudden we're saying, how could we, as many of my colleagues might say, I live down here in Texas now, how could we have 3 500-year flood events in 3 years in Houston, Texas? The answer is by climate change loading the dice against us. Often when we think about climate change, though, we think that's all fine and good, but the only people who really need to worry about climate change are people who look like this, David Suzuki, or this, Elizabeth May or Catherine McKenna, or this, Greta Thunberg, or this, a polar bear. That's often what we think when we think about climate change. But now you know, thanks to what I've shown, that to care about climate change, you only have to be one thing. And that one thing is not an environmentalist. It is not a politician. It is not an activist. It is not a polar bear. The one thing you need to be, and this is literally a t-shirt that somebody made and took a picture of and then sent it to me. I did not make this. The one thing you have to be to care about a changing climate is quite literally a human being living on this planet. That is the one thing you need to be, and we are all that. No offense at all intended. I have hugged quite a few trees in my time. My point here is simply that often we assume that people have to be in the more liberal end of the political spectrum and they have to be an environmentalist to care. Of course, if you are, you do, but you don't have to be. All you have to be is a human. And if you're listening to this, you are that. So that's why the book is called Saving Us. Why did I write it? I wrote it to answer 2 questions. The 2 questions I get most frequently. What gives you hope is number 1. I want to start to begin to answer this question, though, by saying what does not give me hope. And what does not give me hope is how politically polarized this issue is. Since the Obama administration in the United States, climate change has topped the list of the most politically polarized issues in the whole country. So you can't make these figures in Canada because we don't have 2 political parties, but in the US they do. And so what this shows is where the average conservative or Republican is. And I know it's very confusing because Republicans are red in the US, and that means conservative, and where the average Democrat is. And the width of the gray bar shows how far apart they are on an issue. And this list of issues is sorted in terms of the width of the gray bar. And what do we have at the top? We have climate change. This, if you're looking at your dates, was right before COVID hit, right? Right before COVID hit, climate change was right at the top. Where do you think we are today? Here we are today. Right at the top is addressing issues around race, dealing with climate change, and dealing with the COVID outbreak. The only reason why climate change dropped to number 2 is because the Democrat levels of concern dropped. Isn't that depressing? Climate change remains the most politically polarized issue in the United States. Now, you might be saying, well, that's the US. We're different. I wish we were. This is a map by riding. You may think this is a map of the election results from September. It looks a lot like the results of the election map from September, but it isn't. You know what this is a map of? It's a map of whether people agree with 200 years of physics that says that the Earth is warming due to human activity. Yes, that is not a typo. We have known for 200 years that digging up and burning coal and gas and oil is producing heat-trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. Now, back in the 1800s, scientists thought it would take hundreds of years to see warming. But by 1938, a British engineer, Guy Callendar, who was born in Canada, so we'll claim him, Guy Callendar had actually measured the observed warming of the Earth. By 1938, he had measured how the Earth was warming due to burning fossil fuels. And of course, now we know that the Earth has warmed by 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is far more than anything that has ever happened in the history of human civilization on the planet. And that's why it's important. Again, it's not about saving the planet. The planet has been warmer or cooler before. But we humans, almost 8 billion of us, we have never experienced this much warming this fast. And what is at risk? Everything. Our infrastructure, our homes, our health, our water, our food, our electricity systems, our supply chains, our economy. our security, our safety, everything that makes up human civilization as we know it, that's what is at risk from climate change. Yet climate change is still politically polarized right here at home, and that does not give me hope. What else does not give me hope? Don't worry, I'm taking us all the way down before we go back up again, but we need to go here because this is the reason why I care the most about climate change. Climate change is profoundly unfair. It disproportionately affects the poorest and most marginalized peoples who've done the least to contribute to the problem. The poorest 50% of people in the world, some of whom live right here in Canada, the poorest 50% of people in the world have produced 7% of global carbon emissions. 7%. The richest 10% have produced half of the problem. So who's most affected by climate change? Women and girls, especially in poor countries. Indigenous peoples who have already lost so much. Marginalized neighborhoods. Where I live in Texas, when the ice storm hit in February, an ice storm that we know was more likely and stronger because of the Arctic warming causing the polar vortex to stretch, which opens the freezer door, so to speak, and allows all that cold Arctic air to pour all the way down the Rockies, all the way past Alberta, all the way down to Texas. When the Texas freeze engulfed the state, everybody lost power. Guess which neighborhoods got their power back on last? The lowest income neighborhoods, the ones where people didn't have insulation. They might have had cracked windows. They couldn't afford to buy a generator. They couldn't afford to go anywhere else. Climate change exacerbates the risks we already face today. And that doesn't just mean wildfires and hurricanes and heat waves. It means inequality. It means justice issues. It means racism. Climate change takes all the issues we struggle with today and it makes them worse. All right. So if that's the case, I'm the perfect person to ask what gives me hope because I am a climate scientist and I look at this every day. So what does give me hope? What keeps me going? What gets me out of bed in the morning? And you know something does because I'm here, right? First of all, I'm not talking about, often when I say hope, people get kind of upset because they're like, are you just saying that if we just assume everything will be okay like Pollyanna, or we just bury our head in the sand like the mythical ostrich, they don't really do it, that everything will be okay? No, of course not. If we just pretend everything will be okay, we'll just be slightly happier until it's all over, right? That's not going to fix anything. And that is not what I am talking about. Hope is not the guarantee of a better future. Hope is not positive circumstances. In fact, hope begins in a dark place. Hope is the small, tiny light at the end of a very long, dark tunnel that we look to and we strive towards and we fight for, knowing that there is the possibility of a better future, but it is not guaranteed. Real hope recognizes the risk. It's bad and it's getting worse. It accepts that success is not inevitable or even probable. But what hope does is it provides a vision of a better future, something to fight for, something to aim towards, a world where we see blue skies, clean air, clean water, plentiful food for all. Electricity is even more affordable. Equity issues are addressed. Refugee crises are a thing of the past. We don't have to worry about our homes flooding or wildfire engulfing our town or smoke in the air so our children can't breathe. A vision of a better future. That's what hope provides. And how do we get there? By fighting for it. This isn't just me. It's actually scientific. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which issues those code red reports that you've probably heard about, the last one was in August, this is what it concluded. Every action matters. Every bit of warming matters. Every year matters, and every choice matters. The future is in our hands, and what we do matters today more than any time. One of my colleagues is named Catherine Wilkinson. She helped to put together a wonderful book called All We Can Save, which is a compendium of 60 women's voices on climate change. A few Canadian ones in there too. And she said something that I liked so much that I picked this quote to actually end my book. And it's this: it's a magnificent time to be alive at a moment that matters so much. This is the moment that will be written about in the history books. In fact, it's up to us whether there will be history books. Again, it's not the planet that's at stake. It's human civilization as we know it. That's what's on the line. And it's up to us to save it. So why aren't we? Well, we often assume it's because people aren't worried. Remember I talked about this at the beginning? We say, well, I'm worried, but I don't think anybody else is worried. That's not true. The vast majority of us are worried. We are worried. Again, in the US where I live, 70%, in Canada, 75%, the UK, 75%, 84% of young people in 10 countries around the world. We're worried, but we don't know what to do about it. We feel hopeless and helpless. The word for that is efficacy. Efficacy means, do I think that if I do something, it can make a difference? Do I think that if we do something, we can make a difference? Our efficacy is rock bottom low. Why? Well, because we think I'm just one person. What difference can I make, right? I mean, I'm not the prime minister. I'm not the minister. I'm not the CEO of a big corporation. I'm not a famous celebrity influencer. What am I supposed to do? And so we do nothing. But if we do nothing, then nothing happens. The first thing we need to do is realize what the truth is. So often we picture climate change as this giant boulder sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep cliff with only a few hands, those hands I mentioned before, David Suzuki, Greta Thunberg, and the polar bears, maybe, with only a few hands trying to push it up, and it is not budging even a millimeter. And we think, why bother to add my hand to that boulder if it's not going to move anywhere? So we don't. Here's the truth, though. When we look around at all of the climate action that is happening, when we look at the fact that 90% of new energy installed around the world last year was clean energy, 90% during the pandemic. When I look at the fact that I live in the state of Texas, the Alberta of the United States, and it gets 23% of its electricity from clean sources, wind and solar. The city of Houston, the home of the oil and gas industry in Texas, has a climate action plan and will be meeting its Paris goals. The city of Calgary just voted to declare a climate emergency earlier this week. When we look around at what is happening with businesses like Microsoft declaring carbon negative goals, with cities like Chicago, Washington, D.C., Toronto, and Calgary having climate action plans, and Vancouver too, when we look at churches divesting from fossil fuels and schools making a difference and children leading the strikes, we realize that this giant boulder is not at the bottom of the hill. This giant boulder is already at the top of the hill. It is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It already has millions of hands on it. I couldn't find a picture with millions of hands. If anyone would like to draw me one, I will take it. It's already got millions of hands on it. And if I add my hand, it will go a little bit faster. And if I encourage others to add their hands, it will go even faster. That is the definition of efficacy. And that is where we are today. Action is happening. It just is not happening fast enough. And when we add our hands to the boulder, it will go faster. I just got back from Glasgow, where the 26th Conference of Parties, that's what COP stands for, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change occurred. There was plenty to be disappointed over there. When you're trying to get every country in the world to agree by consensus, all it takes is one or two countries to say, oh no, I'm not going to sign that, to force them to change the wording. And that's exactly what happened. They had a pact that they were about to announce that where every country in the world agreed to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, fossil fuels are subsidized to the tune of $11 million US per minute. That far exceeds clean energy subsidies. So they agreed to phase out fossil fuel subsidies and phase out coal use. We've been using coal since the Middle Ages. Coal is the dirtiest and most inefficient way to get energy today. Air pollution from burning fossil fuels, including coal, is responsible for, again, almost 9 million premature deaths per year, almost double that of COVID each year. There is no reason for us to be using coal just looking at the health costs alone. They far exceed any benefits. But even though they were about to agree to phase out coal, at the last minute, a few countries stepped in, coal-heavy countries, and said, we're not going to sign unless it says to phase down, but not phase out. That is discouraging. It's not just discouraging, it's heartbreaking. There were representatives there from low-lying islands in the South Pacific that knew that those words might make the difference between whether they even had an island or not. But at the same time, the boulder is rolling faster than it was just 4 weeks ago. How? Well, first of all, going into, and don't worry, this is as sciencey as I'm going to get, but I figured you might want an update on COP since I was there. Going into COP, with the commitments that countries had made, we had a 66% chance of holding warming to 2.7 degrees Celsius. What's the goal of the Paris Agreement? Below 2 degrees Celsius and 1.5 if we can. Where are we at today? We're already at 1.2. Do we have enough yet? No, but we did up the commitments. So current policies like Canada's climate carbon tax, current policies will keep warming to 2.6 with the extra commitments that countries made, which include, in our case, eliminating methane emissions that are leaking out of old oil and gas wells, contributing to slowing down and eliminating deforestation, phasing out coal. With new 2030 commitments, we could be down to 2.4. And with the net zero promises, and Canada has a net zero promise for 2050, if countries fulfill that, that would take us down to 1.8. It's still not enough, and we still have to do it, but it is a lot more than we had before. But you know what really gave me hope? What really gave me hope was this. Only about 10%, that's not an actual scientific term, that's just my guesstimate, but only about 10% of the people at COP were government and country negotiators. Who was everybody else? Almost anyone you can imagine. My favorite person was an 11-year-old youth activist from Colombia. His name is Fernando there. You can see him in the middle. He had such a smile. He just made my day. There were children and parents and grandparents. There were negotiators. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you see my colleagues from Nature United with the representatives from Gabon. There were big corporations like IKEA and the B Team and Amazon and Unilever and Nestle. There were people marching in the streets. There were Buddhist monks. There were the Secretary General of the World Evangelical Alliance. There were representatives of every religious organization and denomination you can imagine. Everybody was there because they understood that climate change is not an issue just for governments or just for environmentalists or just for polar bears. They were there because they understood that climate change is a human issue. So people came from all across the world. People came from every walk of life. People came from organizations, nonprofits, universities, students. Everybody came to COP because they knew that climate change is a human issue, and to care about it, you only have to be one thing, and that is a human. And that gave me hope because I got to see 100,000 hands on the boulder, literally, that week. And that was amazing. As Greta Thunberg says, the one thing we need more than hope, though, is action. Why? Because once we start to act, hope is everywhere. What is the most important action that you and I as individuals can take? Often you might think I'm going to say, change your light bulbs, change your diet, look at where you get your electricity from, maybe get an EV or take public transport or the GO train. And yes, all of those help, but we have something bigger than our footprint. It's our shadow. How do we interact with others around us? How do we influence decisions that our school is making, our city is making, our place of work is making, our place of worship is making, our organization, our team, whatever we're part of is making? How do we influence those decisions? How do we get more hands on the boulder? By talking about it. Now, some of it may be using our voice, but I also mean we could be writing, we could be creating something, we could be posting something on social media, we could be doing something where other people see us doing it. That's a form of talking too. The most important thing we can do is talk about why it matters and how we can fix it. But you know what? We're not doing it. We are not talking about it. 2/3 of us don't have a conversation about it. Why not? We don't think it matters. We don't know how to communicate why it matters to others, and we don't think there's anything that we can do to fix it. So why bother? So climate changes and we get worried. We're all worried. And what happens? We look around and we say, oh, well, if these people aren't as worried as I am, they need to be. So we load up all of the scary facts we can muster. And believe me, there are a lot of scary facts out there. All true. We load up on the scary facts and we dump it on people. But here's the thing. If we lack efficacy, if we don't know what to do with the information, our self-defense mechanisms kick in. And what happens is it paralyzes us. And we just sort of metaphorically pull the covers back up over our head and go back to bed, so to speak, because there's nothing we can do. And that's exactly what happens. When we share more and more scary data, people just reject it even more and inaction results. This is the way our brains are wired. It's nothing to do with climate change. It's the way we function as humans. There's a neuroscientist named Tali Sharot. She wrote a really good book called The Influential Mind. And in it, and I promise you, she is not talking about climate change here. She's just talking about how the human brain works. Here's what she says. Fear and anxiety will cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action. And so climate just changes more. So that's why the second most common question I get, and the second reason I wrote my book, was this. How do I talk about this? How do I talk about this to my family member, my neighbor, the person I work with, my roommate, my elected official, somebody at the city, somebody, how do I have a conversation about this? If it isn't loading up more scary facts and dumping them on people, what do I do? What do I say? Well, first of all, when I say you can have a positive, constructive conversation, often people immediately jump to the dismissive person that they know. The person you know who's convinced this is a hoax, who brings it up all the time. I have some bad news. I have good news too, but here's the bad news. It is difficult, if not impossible, to have a constructive conversation with someone who's dismissive. Why? Because they won't listen. You can't have a conversation with somebody who isn't going to listen to anything you say. I've tried thousands of times, and I've concluded that it really does take a miracle to have a positive, constructive conversation with someone who's dismissive. But here's the good news. Most of us are not dismissive. We might be doubtful or disengaged. We might be cautious, concerned, or alarmed. But the vast majority of us, even though the dismissives are very loud, and believe me, I meet them on Twitter every day. And no, they are not all American. There is quite a few dismissives on Twitter who are from Ontario or Saskatchewan or Alberta. Even though they're very loud, they are only a small fraction of us. The majority of us, we can have a positive, constructive conversation with. How? By beginning from the heart. Beginning with something we have in common with people. Not beginning with a bunch of scientific facts, not even awkwardly introducing climate change into the conversation, but beginning with who we are. So now I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, and you're going to have to give me your answer in poll EV. I'm going to ask you this. Why do you care about climate change? And I'm going to take you through my inventory first. So I can begin conversations over science because I love science. And if people like science, we can talk about science. And there's certainly plenty to connect with climate change because science is what tells us that it's real and it's us and it's dangerous. But I'm also Canadian, so I can talk about what we see happening in Southern Ontario, how our skies were choked with smoke this summer, how the place where I grew up, going to the cottage with my family, it is completely different. We see invasive species moving in. The lake is warmer. Things are really different. I grew up in a house in Etobicoke that didn't have air conditioning. We didn't need it. Well, my parents had to put it in because they couldn't at least sleep in the basement the whole summer. That was what we normally did for like the 2 or 3 days it was too hot. I live in Texas, which is the most vulnerable state in the US to climate impacts, loading the dice against us. I love skiing, and you need snow to ski. I'm a mom. I would do anything for the future of my child. I've started conversations over the fact that I knit, or I love a good glass of wine. I like going to the beach, and I'm a Christian. I care about climate change because of who I am. And here's the good news. Whoever you are, you care because of who you are. And whoever you are already the perfect person to care because of who you are. And whoever you're talking to, they are already the perfect person to care too. Do you have to make them into what you are? Do you have to force everybody to become a skier before everybody cares about climate change? Of course not. Why? Because whatever anyone else cares about, whoever they are, whoever they love, wherever they love, whatever they love, is already being affected by climate change today. And that means that they already care. And if they don't think they do, they just haven't connected the dots. So now it's your turn. I want one word from you. If you're going to use more than one word, connect it with a dot or a dash, but preferably just give me one word. I want to know, who are you and why do you care about climate change? I care about climate change because I am a what? Fill in the blank for me. I care about it because I am, yes, you are a human. That's right. And that is why you care. I care about it because I'm a mom or a parent. Absolutely. Climate change is the biggest threat to our children's future. Climate change, as I often say, it's like the hurdle that stands between us and a better future. And we have to get over that barrier to get to that better future. I love how we're seeing totally different answers here. And that is perfect. I don't want to see the same answers. I mean, of course, we all are human, I would assume, unless your cat's figured out how to type. But in addition to being human, we are all these different things. We could be young or we could be old. We could be a student or we could be a grandmother. We could be a hiker. We could be an entomologist. I love that. We could be a gardener or an ecologist. We could be a birder or a baker. We could just be a friend or an aunt or a student. Oh, we got a skier there too. An educator, an artist. A food enthusiast. Yes, definitely that. I talk all about that in my book, believe me. Whoever you are already the perfect person to care about climate change. And whoever you're talking to, they are already the perfect person to care. And if they don't think they care, it is because they have not connected the dots between what's already at the top of their list and how climate change is affecting it. So what's your job? Your job is to help them do it. Where do you start? By asking them questions. Figure out what makes them tick. Are they really into fishing or kayaking or ultimate frisbee or beer? Do they really care about, I'm a sailor too. I forgot to mention that. I just saw that. Do they really care about hockey? Well, guess what? Our backyard ice rinks are melting. Whoever we are, whatever we care about, climate change is already affecting everything that's already at the top of our list. And that is how we start our conversations with people, with what they and you already care about today. So start with something you have in common. Explain how we're being affected. If we love hockey, talk about what's happening to our backyard ice rinks. If you love tennis, talk about how they're taking longer breaks in the tennis competitions so the athletes don't get heat exhaustion. If you care about beer and wine, talk about how all these breweries have gotten together and issued a climate declaration to help protect their beer. Explain how it matters, and then we need to talk about what solutions look like. Real, tangible solutions. Some solutions might be things we can do ourselves. Like what? Like, did you know that food waste is a huge source of heat trapping gas emissions? If we reduce our food waste, that's part of the solution. Did you know that what we eat matters? Meat, especially beef, produces a lot of heat trapping gas emissions. So try a meatless Monday or a plant-based recipe. It's good for your health, it's good for your budget, and it's good for the planet too. And when I say the planet, I actually mean us. What about, I love the fact that I got a plug-in car. And so during COVID, I didn't have to go to the gas station more than about once a month or two. And I loved that. And I was very happy to talk about that. But we can also talk about what others are doing. Like what? We can talk about what countries are doing, including our own. We are definitely taking action here in Canada. We can talk about what companies are doing. Companies? Yes. Did you know that companies like Microsoft and Apple and Walmart are all taking action? Did you know that companies like Dominion are offering ugly food that you can buy to reduce food waste and save money? Did you know that churches and faith leaders are taking action? The Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury. There are Muslim declarations, there are Hindu declarations, there are Buddhist declarations. There are declarations from every major faith tradition in the world, showing why what they believe is entirely consistent and compatible with climate action. And in fact, if you take what you believe seriously, you would be out at the front of the line demanding climate action because of your faith. I love telling stories about what's happening in Texas. People are surprised to know that there's so much going on in Texas. There's airports and army bases and entire cities being powered by clean energy. And things are even changing in Alberta. Warren Buffett is backing the biggest wind farm in Canada, and they're building it in Alberta. That's some pretty good news. Young people are speaking out. If they're using their voices, can't we? Our own lives are changing. What we eat, how we get our energy, how we drive, how we transport ourselves. All of that is changing, and we can talk about all of that too. Most of all, though, I think I love talking about how the world is changing. In some of the poorest areas in the world where they don't have coal or oil or gas, but they have a lot of sun and they have a lot of wind. And so that's why, again, last year, 90% of new energy installed around the world was clean energy. And in my book, I tell stories about programs like Solar Sister that empowers women in sub-Saharan Africa by providing them with technology that they can sell to power their cell phones and their lights with the sun. There's so many amazing solutions we can talk about. And where do we start? We kick this all off. We catalyze this by doing the one thing that most of us are not doing, which is talking about it. So that's why when I did my TED Talk, I called it the most important thing you can do to fight climate change. And they're like, well, we already have TED Talks on diets and electric cars. And I said, no, what catalyzes change, what begins change is when we communicate it. That's what begins the change in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our place of work, in our schools, whatever organization we're part of. How are we going to do anything if we don't talk about it first? Talking is, to put it a different way, it's like it knocks over the first domino. And people might say, well, are you sure this works? After I wrote the book, we tried this out on social media. We made 4 short videos that began with values that conservative Republicans in the United States would share. The free market, national security, personal liberties, and Christian faith. Working with researchers at Yale University, we made these 4 short videos that began with something that Republicans would identify with, and then they put that out in real life on social media. And they tracked people's opinions on climate change in those districts. Guess what they found? Democrat or liberal opinions on climate change increased a little bit after they saw these videos on social media. Republican opinions increased twice as much. Why? Because they were hearing about climate impacts and climate solutions from a frame, from values, from perspectives that they already had that showed them that who they already were was the perfect person to care. It works. So climate changes and we get worried. What do? You don't load up on all the scary facts. Here's where you break the cycle. You share how it affects us here and now in ways that are relevant to us, all of those things that you put on that Wordle that we did, and what positive solutions look like. People feel empowered and action results. And here's where our brain comes in. The human brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not avoiding harm. So reframe your message so the information you provide induces hope, not dread. That's what we need to do. Is this enough? Well, I thought about this, and after I wrote my book, I wrote an essay for Time magazine. Is talking enough? Is using our voice to advocate for change enough? And this is what I concluded. Change did not begin when the King of England just woke up one morning and decided to end slavery, or the President of the United States woke up one morning or got tapped on the shoulder by his wife and said, women should have the vote, or when the National Party of South Africa opted to end apartheid. That's not how change began. It began when very ordinary people of no particular power or wealth or fame, decided the world could and should be different. Who were William Wilberforce, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and all the countless others whose names we don't even know, who shared and supported and fought for their visions of a better world? They were people who had the courage of their convictions, who used their voices to advocate for the systemic societal changes needed. Who were they? They were us. We ordinary people are the people who have changed the world before, and we are the people who can change it again. And what is our first step to doing that? Our first step is to use our voice to advocate for why climate change matters here and now in ways that are relevant to us and our lives, and to talk about what we together can do to add our hands to the boulder to get it rolling faster down the hill. So here's my last question to you, and then you get to ask me questions. I want one last word for you. Based on what you heard tonight, based on how you now understand how you can make a difference, every single one of us can make a difference. And in my book, I have so many examples of how conversations have made a difference. When it comes to climate change, how do you feel? Give me one word. How do you feel when it comes to climate change now? When you look at big corporations like Amazon, they have a climate action plan. Why? Is it because Jeff Bezos woke up one morning and decided that they needed to change? I can tell you it was not. It was because very ordinary people who worked for Amazon said, we can and we should be different. So whoever you are, wherever you work, you can have that conversation. Find out what your company or your business is doing. Find out what your university or your school is doing. Find out what your city is doing. Have that conversation. Because where do we find hope? We find it when we act together. And I love what I'm seeing here. Empowered. Exactly. We know what to do. We can make a difference. Let me tell you an Oakville story. Just before COVID, I was giving one of my last talks at the Meeting House, which is a really big church in Oakville. And I began from a Christian perspective about why Christians would care about climate change and talked about what we can do to fix it. And as I was standing there by the door listening to people walk out, I heard one woman say to her friend as she walked out, she said, I've always been worried about climate change. Can you identify with that? But I didn't know what to do about it. So I did nothing. But now I know what to do. I will start by eating the Christmas leftovers. That's how I'm going to start to take action. And that is absolutely what we can do. Just start with something, talk about it, and then look for others. Join up with others. Somebody else at that church started a green team or a creation care team at the church. Join with others, add your hands to the boulder, and together we truly can make a difference. I love this. Hopeful, empowered, inspired, determined, motivated, energized, and ambitious. I like that. Guardedly hopeful is totally fine because, like I said, a better future is not guaranteed. What will get us there? Us. It's up to us to save us. And so that's why I called the book Saving Us.
Hello, Dr. Hayhoe. I'm excited to see the questions from our community rolling in. Amazing. This is an interesting one. Is it better to agitate for systematic change or do personal little changes?
Ooh, I hear this all the time on Twitter. Is it better to do individual changes or to advocate for system-wide change? And my answer is yes. Why? Because a system is made up of people. A corporation is made of people. A government is made of people. A city is made of people. A system is made up of people. And the only way a system changes is when people change. So how do we activate system change? By using our voice. How do we use our voice? By talking about, again, why it matters and what we can do to fix it. What we can do to fix it includes personal choices. It includes choices that we make to change and reduce our carbon footprint, but talk about them. Because imagine this. Let me give you a hypothetical situation. So imagine there's a young teenager who is really, really, really worried about climate change. She actually watched a national broadcast by a scientist talking about climate change and talking about how we are pushing far beyond our planetary boundaries and how if we don't fix climate change, it will fix us. And she was so worried that she emailed the climate scientist and she said, what can I do? She convinced her family to stop flying. That was their choice too. And because they lived somewhere, they didn't live in Canada, they lived in Europe where there were trains, so they could take trains much more easily. They stopped flying, they changed their diet, they reduced their carbon footprint as much as they could. And imagine if they had stopped there. Nobody would know who she was. She wouldn't have changed the system at all. Maybe a tiny, tiny, tiny little fraction due to our consumer choices. I mean, consumer choices do change the system a bit. But her impact would have been this big. She did one more thing. She took a piece of white cardboard and she wrote a few words on it, said school strike for climate. And she went and she sat outside a building. And that building was the Swedish Parliament building. And now everybody knows her name because she used her voice. Did she take personal actions? Of course she did. Why do we do that? Because we want to live, talk the talk and walk the walk. Nobody likes a hypocrite, least of all ourselves. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I take action myself. But I talk about it. I tell people about how I got rid of the freezer and I changed how I shop for my food to reduce my food waste. And I love my plug-in car and my solar panels are great. And I changed how I travel to be more thoughtful and mindful about it. I talk about it, but I also talk about it at my school. I talk about it at my place of work. We're coming out of COVID where I work. And I said, you know what? We traveled a lot before COVID. Could we consider having some, sort of guidance about how these are the meetings that we're going to keep virtual? We don't have to travel to these meetings anymore. I use my voice every time there's an election in my riding. I often email our MPs, not just the ones on the left-hand side of the spectrum. I email the other candidates too and say, what's your plan about climate change? Everybody needs one. This isn't a left side spectrum issue. This is an everything issue. Using our voices is how we catalyze change. It's how we knock over that first domino of change. Using our voices is how we change the world. Remember the examples I gave? Slavery, women getting the vote, civil rights, apartheid, gay marriage. How did those things happen? It wasn't because the prime minister or the president or the CEO or some rich famous person woke up one morning and said, oh, let's change the world. It was because very ordinary people decided the system had to change. They did everything they could in their personal lives. But what really made the difference is when they used their voice to advocate for that change. And that is why every single one of us has that ability to change the world, because we all have a voice.
Amazing, Catherine. That is awesome. How are we doing for time? Another question, Catherine?
I think that's actually probably a great place to end on. I would just encourage people to check out the book if you want more stories about how we can have these conversations and how they truly make a difference. Have those conversations where you live, and you live in a great place where people are already so on board. And don't feel then, okay, everybody's on board, so why talk about it? You can have even better conversations if people are on board, because you can skip over the whole why do you care, and you can just get to what more could we do together? I went to COP, and one of the coolest things I saw was almost everybody had these warming stripe masks on. Everybody was walking around with an evidence of how things are changing on their face. And so when you had conversations, you're actually looking at what's happening where you live. And I went past the Hydro building, and the Hydro building had wrapped the entire outside of the building in the warming stripes for Glasgow, Scotland. So every time somebody walked past the Hydro building, which in Scotland, they are at like 99% clean energy now. 99%, 100 on good days. Everybody knows that their power company is doing everything they can to cut emissions. And this is why, and they have the warming stripes right out there in front. So there's so many things that we can do to just keep the conversation going, and so many tips we can share. If you're doing something that you think is great in your personal life, at your school, at your place of work, your neighborhood, your church, wherever you are, share that information with other people and get it going even more. And if you want more ideas with the book, I should mention, here it is. I'm actually making discussion questions to go with the book. I'm making short videos to go with each section so you can use it for your book club. I'm actually, for the classroom, I'm going to make classroom activities and an annotated reading list so people can use it in the classroom. And all of that's going to be available free on my website, which is just my name, CatharineHayhoe.com, starting in January.
Amazing. What a great gift. So we'll definitely retweet that out. And, if any community member here in Halton wants to share a great story, tag us at Hen here at Halton Climate. We'll share it. Catherine, I love it. We'll start something going after tonight. What do you think?
I love it. That's fantastic.
Well, Catherine, I just want to thank you so much, for sharing your stories and your wisdom. Stories are essential. People need to be heard. It unites people and communities. And it really does support authentic dialogue and change. Thanks to you, we know that something is bigger out there, bigger than ourselves if we all just start talking about it. So thank you so much. I think your stories of hope and collective action have really been a catalyst for change. And I appreciate everything that you do. And I just want to thank you so very much. I love your leadership, your passion, your drive. It's just amazing. And thanks for taking the time to speak to our community. Honestly, this has been an epic event, and I just really want to thank you so very much for everything you've done, from talking to our schools and tonight. It's just been awesome. So thanks so much. I really want to thank our partners and our supporters for tonight. This wouldn't have been possible without Sheridan College, without Cogeco Cable, the Halton District School Board, the members of the Halton Climate Collective, the Oakville Public Library, Burlington Public Library, Milton Public Library, Burlington Public Library, did I say that already? Halton Hills Public Library, A Different Drummer Bookstore, Chapters and Indigo Stores, Simon & Schuster, the Hen Board of Directors. And I really want to thank all of you, out here in Halton. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy lives and your schedules to engage in climate action. You know, we all have a role to play, like Katharine just said, and working together will result in authentic action that will lead transformative change here in Halton. Be sure to check out more of our partners and collaborators in the expo booths as part of the Hopin platform. This is where we highlight local climate action. You can see what's really going on right here in your own neck of the woods. And don't forget to ask more questions to Dr. Hayhoe. Thanks to Katharine, she's going to let us ask even more questions. And then you'll be entered into a contest where you could win one of two of Saving Us. So really excited. So stay tuned to our social media to find out how you can enter into that contest and ask more questions.